In 2003, a retired postal worker named Warren Holt drove his daughter and her college roommate north on State Route 14 to catch the Perseid meteor shower from a pull-off near mile marker 187. 21 years later, a county surveyor recalibrating GPS coordinates for a new cell tower found a roll of undeveloped film wedged behind a trailhead kiosk, 11 frames exposed, 3 showing the interior of Warren's truck and 1 capturing a detail no one in his family ever mentioned to investigators. Warren picked up his daughter Maya from her apartment in Bellwood at 7:14 p.m. on August 12. The roommate, a nursing student named Lisa Kern, was waiting on the curb with a backpack and a thermos. Warren's truck was a 1998 Ford Ranger, forest green, with a camper shell he'd installed himself. He told Maya they'd reach the pull-off by 9, set up folding chairs, and watch the sky until midnight. The pull-off sat 12 miles north of the town of Mercer, a gravel semicircle carved into the shoulder where State Route 14 bent around the base of a ridgeline. Logging roads branched off into the timber every few miles, but the pull-off itself was empty most nights. Warren had used it twice before, once with Maya when she was in high school, and once alone the previous summer. They arrived at 8:52 p.m. Maya texted her boyfriend from the truck before they lost signal. The message read, "Here early, no one else around. Dad says peak is at 11. That text carried a timestamp that would later anchor the first hour of the timeline. Warren unfolded 3 chairs and set them facing northeast. Lily placed the thermos on the tailgate. Maya asked her father if he'd brought the star chart he always carried in the glove box, and he said he'd left it at home because he knew the Perseids by heart. The air was cool, mid-50s, and the sky was clear except for a thin band of cloud along the horizon. At 9:40 p.m., a county sheriff's deputy named Ron Melker drove past the pull-off on routine patrol. He noticed the Ranger and slowed, saw 3 figures in folding chairs, and continued north. He would later recall that the truck's camper shell was closed, and that one of the occupants, he thought it was the older man, waved as he passed. Melker reached the end of his patrol route at mile marker 203 and turned back south at 10:18 p.m. When he passed the pull-off again at 10:31 p.m., the truck was still there. The chairs were still arranged in a row. He didn't stop. He noted the time in his log because a logging truck had been parked halfway onto the shoulder near mile marker 192, and he'd radioed the driver to move it before continuing his loop. At 11:07 p.m., a pair of hikers returning late from a ridge trail pulled into the same pull-off to check a map. They saw the Ranger, the chairs, and no people. One of the hikers walked over to the chairs and noticed that 2 of them had been knocked onto their sides. The thermos was on the ground, the cap off, liquid pooling in the gravel. The hiker called out twice, got no response, and after a brief discussion with his partner, decided to drive into Mercer and report it. The hikers reached Mercer at 11:34 p.m. and found Deputy Melker refueling at the only gas station still open. Melker returned to the pull-off at 11:49 p.m. The truck was locked. The keys were not in the ignition. The chairs were on their sides. The thermos was empty. Melker used his flashlight to walk a perimeter, extending 50 feet into the tree line. He found no tracks, no disturbed soil, no clothing, no sign of struggle. He radioed for backup at 11:56 p.m. 2 additional deputies arrived within 20 minutes. They searched the immediate area until 2:30 a.m. and found nothing. At first light, a search team of 12 volunteers and 4 deputies combed a half-mile radius around the pull-off. They found no footprints leading away from the truck, no torn fabric, no blood, no identification. Warren's wallet was in the truck's center console. His phone was in the cup holder, battery dead. Maya's purse was on the passenger seat, her phone inside it, also dead. Lily's backpack was in the truck bed, under the camper shell, the zipper open, a water bottle, and a sweatshirt still inside. The search continued for 6 days. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the ridgeline. Divers checked a creek that ran parallel to the road a quarter-mile east. Dogs followed scent trails that looped back to the pull-off and stopped. On the 7th day, the lead investigator, a state trooper named Garrett Poole, held a press conference and said the case remained open, but that active searching would be scaled back. 3 weeks after the disappearance, Maya's boyfriend received a postcard in the mail. It was postmarked from a town called Whitley, 83 miles southwest of the pull-off, dated August 18th, 6 days after the meteor shower. The front of the card showed a generic image of a mountain range. The back had no message, just Maya's boyfriend's address written in block letters that didn't match her handwriting. The postal inspector examined it and concluded the writing was recent, but couldn't confirm who had written it or when it had been placed in a mailbox. 4 months later, a clerk at a library in Corvallis, 60 miles west of the pull-off, called the tip line to report that a woman matching Maya's description had checked out 2 books on local history in late November. The clerk said the woman had used a library card under a different name, but the signature on the checkout slip looked similar to a sample the clerk had been shown by investigators. The lead was investigated, the card traced, and the signature analyzed. The handwriting expert said it was inconclusive. In 2007, a hunter found a pair of women's hiking boots in a ravine 11 miles north of the pull-off, near mile marker 198. The boots were a size 7, the same size Maya wore, but they showed no signs of wear and had no mud or organic matter on the soles. DNA testing found no biological material inside the boots. They were cataloged as evidence and filed. In 2011, a man called the tip line from a payphone in eastern Oregon and said he'd given a ride to a woman and an older man in 2003, the week after the Perseids, and that the woman had mentioned watching meteors with her father before deciding to go a different way. The call was traced to a rest area on Interstate 84, but by the time a deputy arrived, the caller was gone. The recording of the call was reviewed and re-reviewed. The voice was male, middle-aged, calm. He provided no names and no details that weren't already public. Warren's ex-wife, Maya's mother, hired a private investigator in 2013. The investigator spent 3 months re-interviewing witnesses, reviewing the case file, and walking the area around the pull-off. He found no new leads. His final report suggested the family consider the possibility that all 3 individuals had left voluntarily, though he acknowledged the evidence for that theory was circumstantial and incomplete. In 2019, the file was transferred to a cold case unit. A detective named Lisa Kern read through every report, every witness statement, every search log. She noticed that Deputy Melker's second pass by the pull-off at 10:31 p.m. had occurred during a narrow window when the moon was behind the ridgeline, dropping visibility below 30 feet for anyone standing outside the cone of the truck's parking lights. She calculated that the truck's battery could have kept the parking lights on for approximately 90 minutes if they'd been left on after Warren turned off the engine. But the lights were off when the hikers arrived at 11:07 p.m., which meant someone had either turned them off manually or they drained on their own. The truck's battery was tested in 2003 and found to be at 62% charge, enough to keep parking lights on for at least 4 hours. Kern requested the original evidence logs and found a note she hadn't seen in any of the summary reports. The note said that a disposable camera had been found in the truck bed, under the camper shell, on the morning after the disappearance. The camera was logged as item E17, marked undeveloped, and sent to the state lab. But there was no follow-up report indicating that the film had ever been processed. Kern called the lab. A technician searched the archive and said the camera had been returned to the sheriff's office in 2004 after it was determined to be non-evidentiary. Kern drove to the sheriff's office in Mercer and requested item E17. The evidence clerk found it in a box marked Holt, 2003, closed pending. The camera was a Fujifilm QuickSnap, the kind sold at gas stations. The film counter showed 11 frames exposed. Kern sent it to a private lab in Portland that specialized in developing old film. The lab returned the negatives 3 weeks later. 6 frames showed the interior of the pull-off at dusk, the chairs, the truck, the edge of the tree line. 3 frames showed the inside of the truck, the steering wheel, the rear-view mirror, the dome light. 1 frame showed the back of a woman's head, short dark hair, facing away from the camera. The final frame showed a close-up of the truck's dashboard, centered on the odometer. The odometer read 14,287 miles. Warren's registration paperwork from 2003 listed the truck's mileage at the start of that year as 13,621. Between January and August, Warren had driven the truck to work every weekday, approximately 14 miles round trip, and had taken it on 2 longer trips, one to visit his brother in Idaho in April, and one to the coast with Maya in June. Kern calculated that the truck should have been at roughly 14,950 miles by mid-August, assuming Warren's commute remained consistent and he hadn't taken any additional long trips. The odometer in the photograph was more than 600 miles short of that estimate. Kern requested Warren's phone records from 2003. The carrier had archived them, but still had partial logs. On August 10th, 2 days before the meteor shower, Warren's phone had pinged a tower in Bellwood at 3:22 p.m. On August 11th, it pinged a tower near Corvallis at 9:14 a.m. and again at 9:50 a.m. Corvallis was 60 miles west of Bellwood, in the opposite direction of the pull-off. There was no record of what Warren had done there, and no one in his family had mentioned the trip. Kern drove to Corvallis and requested access to municipal records for August 11, 2003. She found a parking citation issued to a green Ford Ranger at 9:31 a.m., parked in a 2-hour zone near the county courthouse. The citation listed the plate number. It matched Warren's truck. Kern checked the courthouse visitor log. Warren's name did not appear, but a clerk remembered that the courthouse had been closed for maintenance that day, and anyone needing access to records had been redirected to a temporary office in the basement of the public library, 2 blocks away. Kern went to the library. The visitor log from August 11, 2003, was still on file. Warren's name was on page 4, signed in at 9:28 a.m. The log indicated he'd requested access to property records. The librarian who'd been on duty that day had retired, but Kern tracked her down and called her. The woman said she remembered Warren because he'd asked for plat maps covering a specific area north of Mercer, near State Route 14, and had spent nearly an hour photographing pages with a digital camera. Kern requested the plat maps Warren had been looking at. The maps showed a 40-acre parcel that had changed hands twice in the 1990s and was listed as undeveloped forest land. The current owner, as of 2003, was a limited liability company registered in Nevada. Kern contacted the Nevada Secretary of State and requested the LLC's registration documents. The company had been dissolved in 2006, but the archived paperwork listed a single member, a man named Victor Ruiz, with an address in Tacoma, Washington. Kern ran Victor's name through state and federal databases. He had no criminal record. His driver's license had expired in 2009 and had not been renewed. His last known address was a rental house in Tacoma that had been sold in 2010. Kern contacted the Tacoma Police Department and requested a welfare check. A patrol officer visited the address and found it occupied by a family who'd moved in 2 years earlier. They'd never heard of Victor Ruiz. Kern filed a request with the Social Security Administration. Victor's Social Security number had not been used since 2008, There were no death records on file. Kern cross-referenced Victor's name with phone directories, voter rolls, and property records in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. She found one match, a phone number listed under Victor Ruiz in Spokane from 2004 to 2007. She called the number. It was disconnected. In 2024, a county surveyor named Alan Trask was hired to recalibrate GPS waypoints for a new cell tower being installed near mile marker 189, 2 miles north of the pull-off, where Warren's truck had been found. Alan used a handheld GPS unit to record coordinates at several landmarks, including the trailhead kiosk that marked the start of a fire access road. When he leaned against the kiosk to adjust his equipment, he felt something shift behind the information board. He removed the board and found a roll of film wedged into the gap between the board and the post. The film was in a plastic canister, sealed with duct tape. Alan opened it and saw that the film had been exposed. He took it to a photo lab in Mercer. The lab developed it and returned 12 prints. 11 frames showed the interior of a truck at night, a man's hands on a steering wheel, a woman's profile in the passenger seat, a sleeping bag folded in the back seat, a dashboard lit by instrument lights. One frame showed a handwritten note taped to the sun visor, the text visible, SR 14 north to FR 229, 6.3 miles, fork left, 1.8 miles, gate. Alan took the prints to the sheriff's office. The case was still filed as open pending, and the new evidence was logged and forwarded to Detective Kern. She compared the prints to the evidence from 2003. The dashboard in the new photos matched the interior of Warren's truck. The handwriting on the note matched samples of Warren's writing from his employment records. Kern cross-referenced the directions on the note with Forest Service maps. Forest Road 229 was an unmaintained logging road that branched off State Route 14 at mile marker 191, 4 miles north of the pull-off. The fork mentioned in the note matched a spur that led to the 40-acre parcel Warren had researched in Corvallis. The gate at the end of the spur had been installed by the property owner in 2001 and had been removed after the LLC was dissolved in 2006. Kern requested a search warrant for the parcel. A team of investigators and a cadaver dog searched the property over 2 days in late September 2024. They found the foundation of a small structure, long since collapsed, and a scatter of rusted tools and rotted lumber. The dog alerted near the foundation. Excavation revealed a layer of disturbed soil approximately 3 feet below the surface. The soil was sent to a forensic lab. Tests identified trace amounts of human decomposition markers consistent with remains that had been present for more than 15 years. But no bones, no tissue, no identifiable remains were found. The lab concluded that if bodies had been buried there, they had either been removed or had decomposed entirely. Kern re-interviewed the hikers who discovered the empty chairs at the pull-off in 2003. One of them, a man named Eric Stowe, said he'd seen a second vehicle parked on the shoulder about 100 yards south of the pull-off when they'd arrived at 11:07 p.m. He hadn't mentioned it in his original statement because it hadn't seemed relevant. He described it as a full-size pickup, dark-colored, possibly blue or black. He hadn't seen a plate. Kern checked Deputy Melker's logs from that night. Melker had noted the logging truck at mile marker 192, but had not mentioned any other vehicles. Kern called Melker, now retired. He said he didn't remember seeing a second truck near the pull-off, but he acknowledged that his focus had been on the logging truck and that he might have missed a vehicle parked farther down the road. Kern reviewed toll records from State Route 14 for August 12 and 13, 2003. The nearest toll plaza was 60 miles north, near the state line. 3 vehicles matching the description of a dark full-size pickup had passed through between 11 p.m. on August 12 and 2 a.m. on August 13. 2 had been traced to local residents, The third had been registered to a rental company in Spokane. Kern contacted the company and requested rental records from that week. The truck had been rented on August 11th by a man named Thomas Lang. He'd returned it on August 14th. The rental agreement listed a Spokane address and a Washington driver's license number. Kern ran the license. It had been reported stolen in July 2003 and had never been recovered. Kern requested surveillance footage from the rental office, but the company said footage from 2003 had been destroyed years earlier. She contacted the Spokane Police Department and requested any reports filed under the name Thomas Lang in 2003. There were none. In October 2024, a woman named Rachel Holt, Warren's younger sister, called the tip line. She said she'd been going through old family photos and had found a letter Warren had written to her in 2002. The letter mentioned that he was considering buying property in the mountains as an investment and a place to disappear for a while if things got too heavy. Rachel said Warren had been under financial stress that year due to an unexpected tax bill and had talked about simplifying his life. Kern reviewed Warren's financial records from 2002 and 2003. In April 2002, Warren had withdrawn $8,000 in cash from his savings account. There was no record of what he'd done with the money. In May 2002, the Nevada LLC had purchased the 40-acre parcel for $9,000. County records showed the sale was completed with a cashier's check. Kern compared the timeline. Warren had withdrawn the cash 5 weeks before the LLC purchased the property. The LLC's registration documents listed Victor Ruiz as the sole member, but the Secretary of State's office confirmed that Nevada law allowed LLCs to be created with minimal documentation, and that it was common for individuals to register companies under proxies or intermediaries. Kern contacted a handwriting analyst and asked her to compare Warren's signature on the 2002 withdrawal slip with the signature on the LLC's registration documents. The analyst said the signatures showed similar baseline characteristics, but that the LLC signature had been written more deliberately, as if the writer were trying to disguise their natural hand. In November 2024, Kern received a call from a man who identified himself as a former co-worker of Warren's at the Postal Service. The man said Warren had mentioned in casual conversation sometime in early 2003 that he was working on a plan and that he'd figured out a way to start over without burning bridges. The co-worker said he hadn't thought much of it at the time and had assumed Warren meant he was planning to retire early. Kern requested Warren's employment records. Warren had been eligible for early retirement in 2004, but had not filed the necessary paperwork before his disappearance. His pension had been held in escrow and had eventually been transferred to Maya's mother as next of kin in 2011. In late November 2024, Kern returned to the trailhead kiosk where the film had been found. She measured the distance from the kiosk to the pull-off, 1.9 miles. She walked the shoulder of State Route 14 between the 2 points and found a shallow drainage ditch running parallel to the road. The ditch was dry in November, but would have carried runoff during the spring and late summer. She followed the ditch north for half a mile and found a culvert that passed under the road. On the far side of the culvert, she found a rusted metal toolbox partially buried in sediment. She opened the toolbox. Inside were 3 items: a road atlas from 2002, a pair of work gloves, and a laminated business card. The card listed a phone number and the name V. Ruiz Consulting. Kern called the number. It was disconnected. She sent the toolbox and its contents to the lab. The atlas had been water damaged, but several pages were still readable. One page showed a hand-drawn route from Bellwood to Corvallis, with a circled notation, Courthouse Property Records. Another page showed a route from the pull-off to Forest Road 229, with a second notation, Gate Code 4729. Kern contacted the Forest Service and requested access logs for Forest Road 229 from 2003. The Forest Service said the road had been gated in 2001 and that access was restricted to the property owner and authorized personnel. The gate code had been changed in 2004 after the LLC was dissolved. The code used from 2001 to 2004 had been 4729. Kern compiled her findings into a supplemental report and submitted it to the district attorney in early December 2024. The report concluded that Warren Holt had likely planned his disappearance in advance, that he had researched and possibly purchased the 40-acre parcel through an intermediary, and that he had used the meteor shower trip as an opportunity to execute the plan. The report further concluded that Maya and Lily had likely accompanied Warren willingly, at least initially, but that their subsequent fate remained unclear. The district attorney reviewed the report and determined that there was insufficient evidence to support criminal charges. The case remained open pending. Kern's final note in the file read, "The photograph of the odometer places the truck 600 miles short of where it should have been by mid-August. If Warren drove to the parcel and back on the night of August 12, the round trip would account for approximately 18 miles. The remaining discrepancy, more than 500 miles, suggests additional trips or activity not documented in any known records. The destination and purpose of that mileage remain unknown. If someone had driven Warren's truck 500 undocumented miles in the months before the meteor shower, where would they have gone? And why would every trace of those trips have been erased?"